Welcome to the evening show with Jackie Brambles. Brilliant to have you here with us tonight to share in one of our great conversations with one of your favourite living legends of the 70s, 80s and 90s. And tonight, this is a bit special. When I have these conversations about memories that are attached to certain pieces of music, that can often take us to philosophical chats about the meaning of life. Well, tonight's guest is having a very, very real experience with that. No pontificating or pondering necessary. He was part of Duran Duran during their meteoric rise to fame. They, of course, were recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but sadly, he couldn't be there because, as the band learned themselves when he wrote them a letter explaining his absence from the ceremony, he's been dealing with stage 4 prostate cancer for the last few years. And in fact, by that point had become so ill that he was receiving palliative care just a few months ago. However, when the news broke publicly about his cancer, he got a call from a scientist that changed everything. And I'm just so delighted to welcome Andy Taylor. So how are you doing, Andy?
I'm doing better than could be humanly expected.
Well, yeah. I mean, can we just start with that news first of all, that your cancer seems to be, are you allowed to say in remission or it's fleeing for its life, or what's happening? I mean, you've had this amazing treatment and you're out promoting an album. So that kind of says it all.
That's it. Is it, how are you feeling? It's like, well, I'm here. So that in itself is a bit of a miracle. And I started a treatment a couple of months ago, which is a nuclear medicine, which is a different experience. But essentially, I had a clinical letter after the first course of treatment, and I was asymptomatic, which is stunning, considering I've had stage 4 cancer for maybe about 9 years. And I was like, at first I had to phone up a friend. I'm like, what exactly does asymptomatic mean? And
yeah, let me Google it. What does that mean?
One of a cancer buddy of mine, and she says, you're asymptomatic? I'm like, yeah. She's like, no. I'm like, what does it mean? She said, you've got no symptoms. I said, well, no. She said, that's incredible. And it didn't really sink in at first. It's the same as when you get told that it's really bad.
Yeah.
Then you get told it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm in this little bit of sort of heavenly haze at the moment because I dodged such a big bullet, and I'm able to do this and get on. The science is getting so advanced. So it's a little bit born again, and not in that weird religious way, just in, spiritually, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
I can do this. And the thing I love doing, which is making records, writing music, bringing joy to myself and anyone else that wants to join in.
Well, listen, I tell you what, I've been listening to the new album, particularly the new single. Let's say the new album, of course, is Man's a Wolf to Man. The new single is so joyous. It's called This Will Be Ours. Can you talk a little bit about about the meaning behind that?
It was that old. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this tale before. It was the last one to make the album, and it made the album because I play it. Mark, my engineer, the long-suffering chap, he works with a lot of other younger artists as well, James Bay, Sam Fender. So it's a listen to the young'uns, because they have got something to say.
Yeah.
And about April, we were finishing putting a record together, and I was looking forward to treatment, and everything was on the up. The blacklist had become a whitelist kind of thing.
Right.
And I played him the track. I said, I'm thinking about putting this on the album. He's like, well, what are you talking about? Stick it on the album. And, just very straightforward joy. And I'm like, it's really good. So we mixed it, and it was the last track to make it. So you got yourself together, but you still feel alone.
This Will Be Ours, the brand new single from Andy Taylor, our very special guest on The Great Conversation tonight. I'd call that a jaunty tune, Andy.
It's quite a northern kind of inspired song. I recorded it about 7 years ago. It was one of the first things I wrote when I was getting back into writing for myself.
Yeah.
It's got a real sort of skiffle backbeat.
Yes.
right? And it come, everyone on it is Geordie.
Is that by design or accident?
It was by design 7 years ago.
You wanted sort of a homegrown sound and vibe?
Yeah, most of the players on the record, like Greenie and drums, he's a Geordie. Paul Turner, well, he's from Sunderland, but that's okay.
We'll let him off.
Yeah, Tom Pedal Steel, he's a Geordie. Mark Engineer's a Geordie. Me. And I grew up there. And one of the reasons I did that was I grew up with there's an amazing amount of great musicians up there. And it's a long way down to that London. And it always has been. Now, the kind of the dial's turned and it does point a bit more north. But I grew up around tons of stunningly brilliant musicians. That's how I learned in the Northeast. And there's a certain feel, and it comes from folk music and skiffle and blues. I think this will be ours. It's just you can run around trying to find all the glamour and glitz and that, but you're always going to end up home with the people you love, and that's what this world can't take away from you.
Oh, I love that.
It can take everything else away from you, but it can't take away. This will be ours. What is ours, and I think being northern, when you go back up north,
yeah,
pubs have still got the same name, families are still quite close. All my mates still live in the same place where they grew up. And I do cherish that quite a lot.
Oh.
That connection I still have with them.
That's the perfect starting point for us asking about your musical roots, as we do. Do you remember, Andy, the first record you ever bought?
My father was really, obsessed with music. He played the harmonica really well. Like my nan used to play the spoons. She had a couple of drinks. She was up singing in the Working Men's Club where we grew up behind. So I go back to the record player that used to have the singles stacked, and the singles just used to drop. That was my dad, and so I was probably conscious. I can remember the 1966 World Cup. And I can remember stealing my cousin's copy of Sgt. Pepper's off her and writing on the top of the album, "This belongs to Andrew Taylor." No, seriously. And then I got into the Kinks. But that late 60s pop music, my dad was a massive Stax fan, Otis.
Yeah.
I got sunshine. What can make you feel this way, my girl?
Otis Redding, who epitomised the Stax sound that our guest Andy Taylor's dad loved so much. That's the sound of his childhood, and we will continue meandering through Andy's most meaningful musical memories as we continue our great conversation next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where tonight we're joined by a man who is a bit of a medical miracle. Duran Duran's Andy Taylor has a new solo album out called Man's a Wolf to Man. He's in fine fettle. More importantly, he has a new lease of life. After several years with cancer, he's had a new treatment and is doing really, really well. And we're doing well as he delves into his musical memory bank. Before the break, Andy, you were talking about your dad being a big soul music fan. So plenty of music floating about the ether of your childhood.
The family were very musical. We had a piano. One of my uncles played trumpet. There were, it was all in the background, but no one ever left to do music.
Yeah.
You fished or
unheard
you
of.
worked on the buildings. Yeah, it was that. When I popped up and said that one, I mean, literally I'm the first male of my family to leave the village.
Oh, amazing.
For I can go right back to my great-great-great-grandfather, and they're all lifeboat men and fishermen, and I my grandmother was the one that kind of, in the 70s was not great up north. And I took all of that learning that I gained up there working in the working men's clubs, that was a tough apprenticeship doing that.
Absolutely.
I took all that down to Birmingham when I was 19. I'd done hundreds of gigs, and I'd also worked on the American military bases in Germany and Italy, where you would go over and do 6 45-minute sets a night.
Wow.
You had like a repertoire of 250 songs kind of thing.
How amazing.
So I did all of that, and that's kind of where you learn what songwriting's all about, is when you learn to play all these different styles of songs, and you begin to understand structure, key changes, chords. Like, I was always like, those damn Stevie Wonder chords, how'd you do that? And that's all.
A favourite Stevie track that would demonstrate that, you trying to emulate him?
An album, Songs in the Key of Life, was so influential on me.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who took Mick Ronson's place in the Spiders from Mars was my neighbour, and one of the most brilliant guitar players from the Northeast. And he showed me a lot when I was a kid, and also, you know, the craft of some of these chords, that the jazz chords, the 11ths, 13s, major 7, minor 7s, augmented, diminished, all this stuff that went into these beautiful Stevie Wonder songs, and how they structured melody around those chords, as opposed to the kind of chords that we would use in Western European white music.
Right.
You know, higher ground. I mean, can you get any funkier?
People keep on learning, turning. Doesn't bother me too long.
Higher Ground, Stevie Wonder from the Innovisions album back in 1973. A favourite of tonight's special guest, Andy Taylor, as he honed his guitar playing craft. And as you say, that sort of well equipped you when you arrived in Birmingham and met these bunch of likely lads who very quickly, it was within months, wasn't it, that you were signed, Duran Duran was signed and sort of on their way. Do you have a clear memory of like your, you know, that first Top of the Pops, which, you know, for anyone who's British, is just like stepping through the looking glass, isn't it, going on Top of the Pop? We all used to sit and watch it every Thursday night, and suddenly you and your new band are on there. I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, first thing about Top of the Pops is you get there, you go, are these the dressing rooms? Right? And then it's down in some basement where no one goes. And then you go in there and go, God, the studio's small.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, TV cameras. I guess when you watch telly, it's fascinating. When you do telly,
Not quite as glamorous as it looks, is it?
It's not quite as glamorous as it looks. But I do remember, you know, you making that call to your dad. We got Top of the Pops, Dad. Never. And yeah, we got Top of the Pops, you know. And you remember how big a deal it was. You'd fly back from Australia to do Top of the Pops. I remember bands would do that. They'd interrupt tours. They'd cancel shows to do Top of the Pops. And I think that, you know, at that time, we had this great relationship with America. We had about 40% of the music that was in the American Billboard charts was British. So we had this really great conversation with the American audience, and that, I think the BBC Top of the Pops Radio 1 really opened up British music and so it could travel. And it's like, I think we said originally when we did it, we wanted to play live. We were always, you know, we'd always overshoot with our ambitions. Like, you can't play live. You've got to use the plastic cymbals and all that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So we go in, it's like, no one plays live. Anyway, we go in, and, you know, it was incredible. You know, that was, as you said, the pinnacle of, if you got on Top of the Pops, you were almost guaranteed for your record to go to the charts. Anyway, we got there, and you can't play live. And I just, being me, I was wandering around. I wandered in the next studio, and there was The Who playing live. And I'm like, and they had their whole rig and everything, and I'm like, well, I guess they are The Who.
Studio buddies to Duran Duran at their first Top of the Pops outing. That's The Who with You Better You Bet from 1981. One of the things that, when you sort of look at your amazing biography, is you're one of very few artists who took to the stage twice in Live Aid. That's right, isn't it? You did it with Duran Duran and then with Power Station. I was sober when we did it with Duran. No, I was sober when we did it with Power Station, but quite drunk by the time we did it with Duran. Because you know what they did? They put us on after Led Zeppelin. Bill Graham, the promoter. I looked at we got there, and I'm like, Power Station was on a bit earlier, and it was fun doing both. And then I looked at it, so Led Zeppelin, Duran Duran. I'm like, they're having a laugh. There's not a natural transition. Well, you know, I'm saying they're having a laugh. Anyway, Tony Thompson was playing with Led Zeppelin. So Tony played twice. He played with Power Station and Led Zeppelin. Very cool. Pretty cool.
And because Led Zeppelin was disaster, I was sitting on the side, right up the back, watching Zeppelin, going, this is great, because they're not doing very well. So it's not going to be too bad for us, as I was slugging out of popcorn, you know those big popcorn things? It's full of ice and white wine. Those are the days. And I'm watching it going, they're screwing up. It's not going to be too, they weren't doing well. It's legendary that they
Yes, it is. It is. They struggled that day.
So I thought, and I think A View to a Kill was like #1 at the time. So
It was.
But they were still Led Zeppelin. Anyway, we did okay. And then Simon hit that with A View to a Kill.
Yeah, he was struggling with his throat, wasn't he?
He'd just come off sailing, so maybe he'd been singing too many shanty songs. I don't know.
Listen, let's talk quickly about Power Station and sort of the impact that would have had on the band. I mean, you absolutely loved that creativity, didn't you? With Tony and Robert Palmer, yourself, all getting together. I mean, it was an incredible project.
It started at an after-show party in Sydney after a David Bowie gig.
Right.
And this is a completely true story. So we're in a penthouse suite of a hotel partying with David Bowie and his band. Right? And I went to the bog and not for any nefarious reason, and I bumped into Tony Thompson, yo dude, and I'm like, I really want to talk to you. And me and John were quite obsessed with Chic in terms of their playing.
And just to clarify, we're talking about the renowned drummer from Chic, Tony Thompson.
And, Bernard was just a great bass player. I love Tony's drumming. And I studied Nile quite a lot. I used to play all that Chic stuff in the 70s in cover bands, so I really learned that stuff. It always fascinated me, the brilliance of their production. I'm standing next to Tony, big guy, really lovely fella, funny as you could get. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And then John comes in.
John Taylor, your colleague from Duran Duran.
And we're like forming a band. I just had a few drinks. We weren't doing anything daft, And next thing, we're in New York sitting with Bernard.
How amazing.
They were really interested in how we did it. And, Niall was probably the, top of his game as a pop producer then. And I think our way of doing things really intrigued people because no one could quite figure it out. And I don't expect that we could have ever written it down. It was just our zeitgeist. But Power Station opened up a lot of stuff, which probably, once the cat was out of the bag, it was difficult to sort of get it back in. Well, me, anyway.
And so the Power Station was born. You, fellow Durani John Taylor, Chic's Tony Thompson, Robert Palmer completing the lineup on vocals, with Bernard Edwards of Chic producing and managing. And then, of course, the magic happened.
We want to multiply. Are you gonna do it? Some like it hot, some like it hot.
Number 14 in 1985, Some Like It Hot by The Power Station, the supergroup that our special guest Andy Taylor was a founding member of after the initial few years of pop stardom with Duran Duran. And we will be back to continue this great conversation with Andy Taylor next. Welcome back to the evening show with Jackie Brambles, where we are so delighted to have Andy Taylor here with us as our special guest. His new solo album called Man's a Wolf to Man is out now. Before the break, we were hearing about his time in the supergroup The Power Station. But of course, the rocket ship that launched you into pop stardom was Duran Duran. If I asked you to pick the Duran Duran track closest to your heart, would that be difficult, Andy? What would it be?
Well, Planet Earth, because it was the first single. And I clearly remember writing that.
Yeah.
And coming up with a da-da-da-da. I can remember it. The chord structure is a very familiar chord structure that there's quite a generic chord structure in it. But when I did all of that, I wrote a lot of key changes into it. The key changes as it goes into the chorus. There's a lot of subtlety in Duran writing that people, Hungry Like the Wolf changes key quite a few times. But Planet Earth and Hungry Like the Wolf, in terms of the hits, I think I listen to them now and I'm like, how did we do that at 19 and 20 years old?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and we did. You know, there was no other songwriters. There was no cheating, no Milli Vanilli, no What They Do Now, nobody hidden in the corner, no ghostwriters. Nothing got replaced by anybody else. We ground it out of ourselves. There was no auto-tune. You know, we really had to get it right. And I think that was, you know, that spirit of meeting the challenge when 5 of you, none of you are, you know, world class yet, but you know what it takes, and you're prepared to put yourself out. You know, Simon he was really pushed on the first record. There was no one else could do what he did. There's no one else ever written pop melodies and lyrics like him from the 80s that I know. He's absolutely brilliant at it. And maybe not quite as understood as he should be. His lyrics are something else. And, you know, I don't know anyone that melodically can work around chords in the way he does. He's got a very, very unique way of doing it. And hidden aspect of Duran. I think a lot of, you know, when you look at some of the album tracks, you know, I was always kind of, well, why didn't we do more New Religion? Why didn't we do more Nightboat? Why didn't we go more Floydy and just less kind of pop dance? Duran aren't a pop dance band. They used to be a band, not a production. And I think that's, you know, where my kind of cut is like, you know, we should be experimenting, not being generic, you know. And chasing your own hits is like a mad dog chasing its tail.
How has it been latterly with working back with the band again, Andy? Because obviously there was, you know, that they weren't aware of your illness until they read that letter out, and you know that you had written to them. But you are playing on the new album. Things have come back full circle with you guys. How is it now?
The thing is, you know, Simon came over. It's like we sat in a room, engineer, everyone. You kind of just revert back to your normal. He's lying on the sofa. I'm sitting, making a racket in between the speakers. I'm quite quick when I work, and I'm like bang, 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 getting. 2 days later, I'd kind of got through most of it. He's like, "Do you want to go out to dinner?" And I'm like, "Well, let's just go down to." We were in Ibiza, so let's just go down to the little Spanish hippie local. So we went down there. We had sausage, egg, and chips, and a couple of pints. And
you thought, I'm back in Birmingham all of a sudden.
Well, no, because you know we're sausage, egg, and chips kind of guys.
I like that.
And it was so weird. We got up and left the restaurant, local restaurant, and when we got up and left, the whole restaurant applauded. And I'm like, why did we clean our plates? But he has got an aura about him, Simon. He's, I love him to death. I mean, I've really known him and his family for a long time. But we just had a laugh doing it, and I just left it at that. I'm not band ready or even thinking about that. And as I said, and I've said it many times, I've got an enormous amount of respect for the way they've now held their shape. And the four of them working away, and they've sustained it,
Well, let's talk about some of your other work. Along with your Power Station buddies, you produced Rod Stewart's 1988 album, Out of Order. Give us your best Rodders impression.
All right, and well, I was like, I've seen the wallet. He's not tight. He's so funny, Rod, and also he's very persuasive. But basically, I got a call off his manager, I guess, sort of 1986, you want to work with Rod? And I'm like, what? We ended up in a rehearsal room in the Valley, me and Rod, drummer, and I can't remember. Anyway, it wasn't a normal band. Right next to a strip club.
Of course. And
I was like, let's go for a beer. And a bag of crisps. And I'm like, man after my own heart. And we got together. And within about 2 hours, we wrote 3 songs, all of which made Out of Order. And I was like, and he was like, aye. And I'm like, And both of us knew that was something that didn't happen often. Anyway, I'm like, he said to me, what about, those blokes in a power station? And I'm like, what, you mean Tony and Bernard? He said, what they like? I said, they'll blow you away, mate. Next thing, I get Tony down, and then Bernard, and then we start work, and that we made that album. I couldn't. Rod was 40, I was 26. So Bernard again came in and gave me that help to, like with the power station. Bernard made a lot of my dreams come true music.
Oh, how amazing.
Really, real genius. And he came down and helped me with that and, worked with Rod on vocals. And we just made the album in between him playing football. We didn't do much before 6 p.m. There was a bit of alcohol involved. We got banned from the Dome restaurant. We got banned from Cherokee Studios. We used to drink that 151 rum, and somehow we sold 7 million albums and had 4 top 10 hits and a number 1.
Co-written and produced by tonight's special guest, Andy Taylor. That's Rod Stewart's 1988 hit, Lost in You. Right, final question for you, Andy, something we ask everybody. It's a bit of a tough one. It's not what's your favourite song of all time, that would be bonkers. But it is there a particular song, even if it's just sort of nowish, at the moment, that you find yourself returning to often for inspiration or comfort or just to get you in the right...
I've been obsessing listening to that over the past few months. And I don't know if it's something subtle, it was something in my subconscious about wishing to be here. Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, but I've been listening to that album tons, and particularly that track. I love the guitar on it. It's so simple when you listen to it, and it's a great album. And it's also the one they stuck up the record company with 5 tracks into 9. Don't slag Roger Waters off. He's a national treasure.
Wish you were here.
Wish You Were Here from Pink Floyd circa 1975, the final track of the hour, as chosen by our special guest tonight, Andy Taylor. And if you're kicking it back in Ibiza and a bit bored, I'd get on the old podcast trip, because you've got some fabulous stories to tell and a lovely way of storytelling them. Got a real warmth about you. I think about doing the Ibiza podcast, rock and roll style.
Oh, well, if I could do one over there, but I couldn't guarantee they'd turn up on time or what state they'd be in. I've been there a long time. Ooh, that's a book.
It's been lovely having you on the show and hearing your amazing stories. Let's remind people that the new album is Man's a Wolf to Man.
Oh, yeah.
The new single is This Will Be Ours.
It's the first album I've written for myself for 36 years.
Oh, you should be very proud.
As I say, I've been setting the table for other people for years, and I just set the table for myself this time. And
you've served up a right feast for us all.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to get to. So you took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry, mate.
That's all right. You said it.
Andy, thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Great. Yeah, nice to talk to Jackie. Bye.
I love that great conversation. Andy Taylor, wishing him nothing but continued improving health and just having fun with the new album, this new chapter.